guys, welcome back. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're having a great day. Not too much to say considering I streamed an hour ago, and now we're back to do Stolen Tongues tonight. So, those of you watching the VOD on YouTube or here on Twitch, or who are just new here in chat and stream, I would recommend going to watch all my VODs on my YouTube channel. They are under the playlist Horror Books, or just books, something along the lines. It has books in it. It's the only playlist that has the word books in it. So go check that out. It has all the previous Stolen Tongues readings there, or otherwise you'll be pretty confused. But you're still welcome to join if you don't want to watch those and just chill with me while I read this horror book. So we are 60% of the way done with the book, which is really exciting. You guys have been really loving it, so I'm really happy to keep going with it. When we're done, I'm probably gonna slide back into the scary realm of Reddit until I can find a good story to read. I really want to read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo here on stream sometime. It's not a horror book, but it's more of a mystery. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy that book a lot, but it does cost money to get my Kindle app, so I kind of don't really want to buy it right now. We'll see. But if there are any good books that you guys like this one, that you guys think would be fun to read on stream, recommend them to me. I'll see if I can get them on my Kindle. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I think we can just jump right into it. So I'm gonna change over to my scary stories background and turn on my dark music here. And we're gonna hop right in. I think the volume of the music, or the ambiance, is good enough. I might be adjusting it here and there. One moment, I just want to make sure of something. Okay. Here we go. A brilliant glow enveloped me as I awoke. The sun blazed against the blanket of new fallen snow, and the forest shivered at the rush of a strong breeze. I'd forgotten to shut the curtains last night, and so the morning light dragged me to my consciousness far earlier than I'd planned. My head throbbed. I'd gotten half of my average amount of sleep in the past several days, and now a faint dizziness always clung to me. I used the satellite phone to call Faye, and as it rang, I sat there on the bed staring at the ugly 5 scraped across the window. The creature had probably taken the opportunity to stand there all night, gazing down at me as I slept with a grin smeared across his face. "Hello?" a meek voice answered, snapping my attention away from the muddy inscription. "Hey, you," I said. It felt so good to hear her voice. "Hi. How are you? How's Colin and everybody?" "Fine." Her voice was empty and distant. She must not have recovered as much as I'd hoped. "You okay?" I asked. "Didn't sleep too good," she replied. "But I'm alright. I miss you." Those words tore at my soul. "I miss you too, Monkey Toast. You have no idea." "Did you find my ring?" Faye asked. "I had a dream you found it. Didn't make much sense, though." My heart sank at the reminder. I feared I'd never find it. "Not yet," I said, trying to reassure her. "But I will. If I don't find it here, I'm going to ask your folks to look around their place. It's around here somewhere. Don't worry." "It's not important," she replied. She paused for a long moment and then said, "Keep looking. Need more sleep. Keep looking." The phone clicked and she was gone. "Hello? Faye?" Even in the serenity of daylight, I felt afraid. I reminded myself of why I'd come to the mountain and what I had to do. Find the ring. And wait for Taway. I planned to search the driveway, the outside perimeter of the house, and the path we'd taken into the forest. In an effort to feign some semblance of a normal life, I made myself breakfast and sat at the little table with my laptop. The Wi-Fi slowed to a drip, but I was able to read a bit of the news and skim through emails from students demanding their midterm grades. As I scrolled through my inbox, my eyes stopped at a message sent at 11 p.m. Last night. The subject line read, "Felix, open this now. R.E. Faye." The message was from Tyler, It was long and frantic, obviously written in great haste, and detailed the events of the past few days in my absence. He explained that he'd left several voicemails, but knew that I was unlikely to get any reception to check them on the mountain. Tyler described how Faye had been alert and cheerful the day I dropped her off at his house, but the next morning she'd become more and more lethargic. At some point she told Allison, Tyler's fiancée, that she felt sick and wanted to go home. Tyler resisted for a while, but eventually caved on the stipulation that he and Allison stay at our place with her. Faye obliged and set them up in a guest room. Things seemed to be going well until Tyler got the bright idea to test his superstitions. Faye keeps a photograph of her grandfather Alfred on a shelf in the living room, with a little crucifix and some old rosaries. There's also a vial of holy water from her family's priest, which Tyler stole and dumped into Faye's shampoo bottle, just to see what would happen. That day after her shower, Faye inexplicably threw a tantrum and locked herself in the bathroom. She claimed she felt like hurting someone and wanted to be alone, and only came out after much prodding from Allison. Eventually she calmed down enough to rejoin everyone downstairs, but she refused to eat anything for the rest of the day. Instead, she sat quietly, gnashing her teeth in rage. She seemed to return to normal after several hours. Colin showed up that evening and camped out downstairs. Faye was kind enough to set him up on the couch, and they even had a brief conversation about Carrot, so he was under the impression that Tyler had been exaggerating her strange behavior. Colin is a web designer who tends to stay up late working on commission, so at 2 a.m., he witnessed Faye rushing down the stairs. She dashed into the kitchen, started lapping water from the faucet like an animal. When Colin turned on the light, he saw that her eyes were closed, but she stood up and stared at him for a while without moving. Then she spoke the word Felix, to which Colin answered, "He's in Colorado, remember?" Faye's response to this was, "We set him there to die." She resumed slurping water from the faucet. In the middle of the night, Allison and Tyler had an argument, which ended with Allison storming out of the house. Allegedly, Faye spent hours singing and talking to herself in our bedroom, which prompted Allison to investigate. Faye told her that she was afraid to be alone and begged Allison to stay with her through the night. Allison slept on the floor, but woke up at one point to Faye leaning off the side of the bed, whispering that there was a man without a face wandering around the dark downstairs. She said, "He keeps asking about you," then reached out and combed her fingers through Allison's hair. Tyler spent the last paragraph of the email reassuring me that he was committed to protecting Faye no matter how weirdly she acted, and that he would call the police or take her to the hospital if she did anything dangerous. At the bottom, the final line read, "There's something else you need to know, but I'll let Colin tell you himself. Call us as soon as you can." This new development crushed me. Not only had I failed to draw the creature away from her by returning to Pale Peak, I'd abandoned Faye and put my friends in danger. The more I learned about the imposter, the less he made sense. Could it be that more than one of these things was following us around? Or could one of them simply move across great distances at will? Colin's phone was off, so I left a message requesting that he call me immediately. Then I headed outside with a paper towel to see if I could clean the muddy 5 off the window. The moment I opened the front door, my eyes remained glued on the tree line in the distance. I half expected a grotesque monster to come barreling out of it on all fours, and in my dark reverie, I missed a patch of ice in the porch and fell hard on my side. One of the steps bashed into my ribcage and knocked the wind out of me. Cursing, I picked myself up and limped around the side of the cabin. As I rounded the corner, my breath rushed out of me again. The big stack of firewood that sat near the bedroom window was now a scattered mess. Snow had been scraped away from the place where it once stood. As I moved closer, a heavy cellar door came into view. Thick chains ran across its face, and 2 fist-sized padlocks joined them. All of it was conquered by years of rust, and it appeared that someone had tried to frantically get inside. "The hell you got here?" I said aloud, kicking a log out of the way. Greg, or perhaps Tom, before him, had a secret, and had hidden it well. By the looks of it, nobody had tried to open it in a decade. The place was long forgotten, by all except the imposter himself. An icy breeze kicked up, and the bruise on my side gnawed at my ribs, both sensations working in concert to force me back into the cabin. As I limped back, the satellite phone rang in the kitchen. The sound of branches snapping in the woods behind me hastened my walk. "Where the hell have you been?" Colin demanded. His voice came through distorted, making him sound like an angry robot. "Tell you when I get home," I replied, peering out the kitchen window. "What's the news out there?" "Honestly, I thought Faye was mentally ill," he said. "My mom's sister developed schizophrenia in her 20s, and she started hearing voices, talking to God and the devil and all that. Wandered around the house at night. I assumed that's what was happening to Faye when he told me all of this. I had to see it for myself." "What are you talking about?" I pressed. "See what?" "Everything. The other stuff. The shit we don't believe." I dropped into a chair at the kitchen table. "I still have trouble with it," I said. "Like, I'm gonna wake up and it was all just a dream. Ghosts don't exist, they can't." Static hissed from the phone, then Colin's voice filtered through it. "After last night, I think I'm willing to believe." He paused for a moment, trying to collect himself. "Allison left the day before yesterday, so it was just me and Tyler at your place. I stayed up late to get some work done, and maybe because I was a little afraid that Faye would stab us to death in our sleep and burn down the house." "Dude, you weren't bullshitting, though." "Around midnight, I heard a little kid making noise outside, so I went out there to check. I circled the house before I realized the sounds were coming from your bedroom window, so I went up and woke Tyler, and we stood outside the bedroom door. I've never been so creeped out, dude. I swear there was a child in that bedroom singing and talking real slow like she was drunk. I swear I heard it." "What'd she say?" I asked. "Couldn't make out the words." Colin replied. "Sounded like gibberish, maybe saw me undo or something. Sang it like a lullaby, so we knocked on the door and asked who was in there, and I distinctly heard the kid say, 'Shh,' then mumble something. Tyler pushed open the door and there she was, standing in a corner, facing the wall." "Wait, there was a kid in there?" "No," Colin said. "It was Faye. She was lifting up the framed photos, looking behind them. She said there was little windows back there, and that's where he gets in." A faint nausea burbled within me. Years ago, Faye had moved paintings and portraits off the walls, claiming there were things hidden behind them. It was as if the imposter could read her memories and use them against her. She said something like, "Oh, their skin is so perfect. Which one? Put him down in the hole." So I went over and gave her a little shake. She spun around and covered her mouth with her hands and started talking in the voice of a little girl, same one as before. Her eyes were open, man, wide open. She looked at me like she hated me. "What did she say?" I asked. The heater kicked on, causing me to jump. "It's hard to explain," Colin replied. "She was making these whining and crying sounds and cradling her arms like she was holding a baby. She turned around to hide from us and then said a bunch of weird shit. I don't know, man." "Try to remember," I said. "She wasn't talking to us, I don't think. But she said stuff like, 'It's Faye. I can't see you. Are you up in the trees or down in the hole?' So Tyler hit on the light switch, and as soon as he did, I saw a little kid through the window outside. He was down below, right where I was standing a few minutes before, and he was walking around on his tippy toes and flailing his arms around. You know how when you're a kid, you pretend the ground is hot lava? It looked like that. When he noticed I was watching, he took off." "Did you see his face?" "Nah," Colin said. Static invaded the phone line once more, garbled some of the words. "Too dark, but went after him. Got outside and chased him all the way to that little belt of trees across the street. He was laughing and moving around in there, but then the laughter turned into an adult's. I was scared to go inside, man. Felt like I was... heart attack. I just went a few steps in, and as soon as I did, there was a really tall guy standing there in the shadows. He was naked, and he had his back to me. I sort of froze up, and he just stood there for a while, then started rolling his head around real slow. Made this disgusting cracking sound like 100 knuckles popping." "You've seen him then," I said, exhaling the mixture of relief and horror that swirled in me. "You're not gonna believe this shit, dude," Colin said. "Try me," I said, peeking out the living room window. I was so afraid I kind of stumbled backwards. I tried to leave without taking my eyes off him. As soon as I did, he goes, "Hello?" Colin imitated a croaking sound that might as well have come from a toad, but toward the end of the word, his voice returned to normal. It was like an animal talking at first, but then it became a human voice. Your voice, Felix. "I think he's mimicking me," I said. He's trying to get Faye to think he's me. Something moved past the trees outside. Wait, Colin said. I'm not done yet. So as I turned to run back to the house, the guy starts begging for help in your voice, and he goes, "They're gonna kill me tonight." Colin and I spoke for a few more minutes, but the story weighed down on me so much that I had to force myself to get off the phone. The terror that had kept me alert and on edge when we first visited Pale Peak had clung to me ever since. I'd brought it home with me to California and brought it back again to this awful mountain. But over time, it had morphed into a different set of sensations. Now that terror oppressed me. It loomed over and pressed ever downward, dulling my wits and exhausting my muscles. It hung onto my eyelids. It made me wish for death. If the monster didn't kill me outright, the sleep deprivation probably would. I pictured myself driving Greg's truck right off the icy cliff nearby, and sighed in relief at the thought. Get some rest, I reassured myself. Find the ring. Get the ring. It was still daytime. I reasoned that if I had to stay on the mountain until Tuwei and Nathan returned, I might as well sleep while it was still light out. I nosedived into the couch and hoped that if the imposter truly did plan to kill me tonight, he'd at least permit me one last dream of Faye. Felix, a voice called out. It was close by. A cold feeling strobed across my body, rolling up my back and down my arms. What do you see? The voice asked. Warm air caressed my face as it spoke. 2 hands found my shoulders and squeezed. My eyes cracked open, then snapped shut as blinding light poured into them. A man's face took shape in the stars behind my eyelids. It was passingly familiar. Come on, kid. Need you back. You crazy kid. The voice matched the face, and my brain clicked on. My eyes popped open. Tuwei, I tried to say. My jaw would barely open to let the words out. Freezing wind stung my face. What are you doing out here? He asked, still grasping me by the shoulders. He was a bit shorter than me, but his grip was impressive. He probably would have held me up if I collapsed. A feeling of safety washed over me, then passed as I glanced over his shoulder. A line of snowy trees towered above us, not 15 yards out, and the sun already balanced on their tips. I looked behind me. The cabin rested in the distance. The door sat wide open, and a meandering trail cut through the snow from the porch to where I now stood. I can't feel my feet, I said, shivering harder as my senses returned. That's why we wear boots up here, my friend. Tuwei led me back to the cabin and put a blanket around me. I turned the heater up high and made me some tea from the little bag Nathan had left behind. I laid myself across the sofa. You damn tourists forget, he said from the kitchen. This mountain is a reaper of souls. I stared out the window at the path I'd wandered. I've never sleepwalked in my life, Tuwei. Not once. I don't even talk. I sleep like a corpse. Well, you're under a lot of stress. Sleep deprived. And this place makes people crazy. He made his way over to me with big, steaming mug. I cupped it in my hands and reveled in the warmth. Just don't drop that thing in the snow, he said, nodding at the kitchen counter. I glanced over and noticed the neck pouch he'd loaned to me. It sat next to Greg's car keys. A hot flash of embarrassment chased away the last bit of numbness in my limbs. Tuwei read the apology in my eyes and silenced me before I could speak. Why were you out there? He asked. Actually, I was just about to ask you the same thing, I replied. Did you come up here to check on me? Tuwei knelt down and looked into my eyes. He nodded and put a rough hand on my forehead, checking my temperature. I think you saved my life, I said. A morbid chuckle escaped my lips. Well, I was a bit worried about you, rightfully so, it seems. His eyes twinkled a bit as he smiled. And I try to get a few miles in each day, which reminds me, I've got to get going soon. Storm's coming from the north. It's supposed to be a doozy. I'm leaving tonight, I said, with or without the goddamn ring. It's very special, Tuwei said. He stood up and studied the window behind him, and the imposter knows it. It symbolizes your unity, your love for each other. It's a powerful object, a bit like a totem. Where'd you buy it? I didn't, I said, sitting up on the couch. Dizziness tried to pull me back down. It was my grandma's. I never met her, but it was really special to my mom. Old silver, I think. Real diamonds, too. You really think he could use it against us somehow? Taway sighed as he stared out the window. His breath fogged the glass. The spirit world is a curious place, he said, hovering a finger before the window as if he were about to draw something. The entities within it, their desires, their motives. Few of us will ever know. I was an idiot to think I would just be sitting on a dresser up here, I said, gulping down some tea. They might have dropped it on our hike. I don't think I'll ever get it back. What makes you think she lost it? Taway replied, returning to face me. What if she traded it for something else? He scanned the room until his gaze fell on the front door. What if she gave it to him? The possibility baffled me. Faye had been conversing with the creature for a while now, giving him bits and pieces of information whenever he was able to fool her into it. I just wish I knew what to do, I said. I feel like he's gotten stronger, like he can just come in and out of our heads as he pleases. What if I... Felix, he interrupted. I believe that if you came back to the mountain, we'd be able to find the answers you seek, but I was wrong. You seem to be getting worse, and you haven't found the ring. No one in my community is prepared to help with this. We need to get you back to Faye, and when you're both safe, we'll try another angle. I'm so sorry for all of this. I've wasted your time. I stood up to protest, but Taway embraced me in a tight hug. Keep yourself safe, he said. No more walking around. Put that couch in front of the door if you have to. As soon as I get in the station, I'll tell them you need a lift in the morning. Fuck that, I said, heading for the closet to grab my jacket. I'm going with you. Before my hand reached the knob, my head and limbs turned to 2,000-pound stones. I sagged to the floor. The room spun like a top. You aren't going anywhere, Taway said, hoisting me back to the couch. You'll never make it out there tonight. Then we'll drive, I replied, pointing to the keys to Greg's truck. I've never driven a car in my life, Taway replied. And there's no way in hell I'm getting in that car with you like this. The roads are going to be iced over tonight. Zero visibility. You can't even open a door. I sighed in defeat. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone again. He sensed my worry and smiled. You and Faye are very strong. Keep her in your heart. I'll see you tomorrow. With that, Taway zipped up his jacket and pulled a flashlight from his pocket. You sure you'll be okay? I asked. He pulled the door open and pressed out against the frosty wind, retrieving a walking stick he left on the porch. Been walking this road for decades, he said. It's more dangerous in there with you in the kitchen. I heard all about Faye's little tummy ache. In that case, I said, leaning over the arm on the couch, can I offer you some tacos before you go? They're her favorite. I'm sure they are, he laughed. I took one last look at the barren landscape as Taway closed the door. Golden light poured sideways through the windows. Within the hour it would fade, leaving me alone again in the horrid darkness of Pale Peak. A knot formed in my gut. I lay back down, trying to let my body warm up and recuperate. I slept on and off, and after a few hours, strange images began to flash in my memory. There were scenes I recognized, but couldn't place. The more I focused on them, the further into obscurity they withdrew, until one of Taway's stories drifted into my thoughts. I'd had a dream. Images of a huge hole carved into a mountain rushed to the forefront of my mind. Snow and branches were caked all around the mouth of a cave, and an impossible blackness yawned from within it. I stood there, gazing into the vacant face of the deep, listening to Faye's pitiful cries. When I tried to pursue them, her voice warped into laughing child's, and the entrance collapsed into a wall of stone. I sifted through the images and sounds, grasping for more. There were flashes of trees, of the cabin, of Faye, of Taway and Nathan. Then figments of a longer scene took form. I could see myself from behind. I was walking. At first I couldn't see where I was going, but then the snow appeared. Another tree sprung out of it, then another, and another. In the distance, a crop of branches and bones hung suspended in the air, bending and groaning and crackling, as they were inexplicably wove themselves together. It was the Dreamcatcher. I was walking toward it. As I made my way across the field, something glimmered in the object's center, something that wasn't there before, something I recognized. It was a tiny thing, laced into the twined spiral among the bits of bone and teeth. The ring. I crawled off the couch and staggered to the window. Little of my strength had returned. The dream was probably a trick, seeded into my head by the malevolent whispers of the imposter, but I had to know. I shoved my sockless feet into boots and pulled on a jacket. I hobbled out into the porch and the air held still and the mountain fell silent. Let me answer a text really quick while I'm in a break here. And take a sip of water. Alrighty. Greg's truck still sat in the driveway, but it looked as if it had sunken into the ground. When I approached, I noticed the tires had been slashed to ribbons. My face went red hot against the frigid night air, but I swallowed back the outburst that came rushing up inside me. I stopped halfway across the field, in the same exact place Taway had woken me. 20 yards ahead, the woods began so abruptly that they seemed like the outer wall of some fortress. Darkness seeped from them. It felt thick, with an otherworldly presence that loomed just out of sight. Child, don't wander too far out. Lines from Faye's dream journal echoed in my head. I forced myself onward. The dream catcher was just inside the rim of the tree line. I planned to sneak a quick glance and run back to the cabin. Anticipating that Faye's voice might call out from the shadows, I reminded myself to go back no matter what I heard. Trees lowered over my head, branches snagged my jacket, final warnings to the foolhardy traveler. The air sat heavy and still, holding my frosty breath before me for several seconds before allowing it to dissipate. I circled a large trunk, and there it was. The sickening object hung a few feet in front of me. The branch it dangled from looked gnarled and dead, tainted by the presence of such a foul thing. I froze in my tracks, fearing to approach until the object began to move. It twirled slowly as if it heard my footsteps, creaking and clattering as it did. As soon as the intricate pattern at its center faced me, the dream catcher ceased its movement. An explosive mixture of shock and fear arched through my limbs. Even in the poor light, the ring glimmered faintly. Someone had put it here. Someone had given it back. I was about to read the same part over. 100 thoughts and emotions stampeded through my mind. Had some benevolent force taken pity on me? Or was this a final taunt before the creature took my life? Should I take back the ring? Should I abandon it and tell Faye it was lost forever? What if the totem was a trap? Or what if it was the only thing protecting me from the creature? Retrieving the ring would require me not only to touch, but to destroy the dream catcher. Something Faye, Taway, and my own gut had warned me against. There was no time for debate. The last gasps of daylight had already come and gone, and the forest began to unleash its gloom across the landscape. I strode up to the object and yanked it down from the tree. It was even more brittle than it looked. Pieces of it frayed and broke apart as I tugged on it. I ripped the thing to shreds, snapping the bones and twigs that comprised it until I clutched a tangled mass of sinew. The rage and despair and fear within me condensed at the back of my throat, bursting from my mouth in a series of frustrated cries. I hated this mountain, this forest, and this cabin for what they had done to my family. I hated Faye's parents for lying to us, and I hated myself for leaving her to come back here. Nothing remained of the dream catcher but the engagement ring and the strings of gore that it clung to. I tore it away and grasped the ring in my hands, turning it over a dozen times to make sure it was truly Faye's. The sound of crunching snow came from my left. Something big moved into my peripheral vision. All of my muscles seized up into ice blocks as my brain processed the huge figure. Even without turning to look at him, I instantly recognized his asymmetrical posture and the repulsiveness of his jutting bones. He stood facing away from me, rhythmically clenching and shaking his hands. His head moved back and forth, studying the tree trunks. Still looking down at the ring, my brain screamed at me not to move or make a sound. I held perfectly still, like a surprised rabbit as the figure rolled his arms and head around. His limbs were horribly mangled, as if he'd been dragged out of a car wreck and dangled from puppet strings. "Felix," he gurgled, tilting his head so far back that I could see his face upside down. "I know you." My breath rushed in and out of me so fast I thought I'd pass out. In response, my brain scolded me with images of the creature flaying my body and hanging up in the trees. A muddy cackle issued from its mouth, and it quickly turned around so his body faced me. I couldn't help but look. I could not begin to process the abomination that stood before me. He held the rough shape of a person, but even in the gloom it was obvious that this thing was never human. His form looked composed of different body parts, a patchwork mockery of the species he so desperately wanted to resemble. The head snapped back to its upright position, and a gray ponytail whipped through the air behind it. Deep in their sunken pits, a pair of black eyes widened in glee as they met with mine. He opened his hideous arms as if to embrace me, and took a heavy step forward. "Felix." A shotgun blast of panic exploded through me, propelling me into full sprint. My screams echoed all across the mountain, summoning a choir of evil voices to join in. 1,000 cries rang all around me, stroked by my fiery terror. Their maddening gibberish and the imposter's croaks compelled me to move faster than I'd ever before in my life, and I was back in the cabin in a matter of seconds. I slammed the door against the wails and wind and darkness outside. My tear ducts ruptured and a deluge of frightened sorrow poured down my face. I tried to recite a prayer I learned as a child, but all that came out of my mouth was, "Oh, Jesus, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." I grabbed my satellite phone and held it to my ear, sobbing as I did. No one picked up at the ranger station. William didn't answer his cell. No one was coming to save me. My heart ached with the truth that my brain dared not comprehend. The face I just saw was Tuwei's. One night, when I was a little boy, I had trouble falling asleep. Sensing that other people were awake in the house, I got out of bed and walked to my older brother's room. He and his friends were watching a horror movie and eating pizza. When I pushed the door open, the room was illuminated only by a television's glare. On the screen was a teenager napping on his bed. Unbeknownst to him, a living skeleton crept in through the window and loomed over him. The scene horrified me so much that it short-circuited my brain. I blacked out right there in the hallway. My brother carried me back to my room, where I had no further trouble sleeping. When presented with incomprehensible terror, the mind will defend itself in strange ways. The same thing must have happened to me now. My heart slowed to a hypnotic rhythm, my lungs didn't burn for air. My guts didn't churn and wrench inside me. My body was making peace with the reality of its imminent destruction. I struggled to maintain consciousness. Satisfied with the barricade I'd hastily constructed out of furniture against the front door, I used my last ounce of strength to crawl back to the bedroom. Halfway down the hall, I blacked out, and the ancient memory of the skeleton on the TV was my last conscious thought. I don't know how long I slept. I woke up in bed. The sheets were tucked gingerly around my body, and a full glass of water rested just beside me on the nightstand. I glanced around the dark room, supposing I had climbed into bed and simply couldn't remember doing it. My wits slowly returned to me, but it took me a long time to realize there was an arm draped across my chest. The physical sensation of it was natural. Faye always almost fell asleep against me, or at least kicked and elbowed me as she argued with her dreams. Confused, I tried to recall where exactly I'd gone to sleep. Was I back home? Was I in Avonwood? I gently rolled away from the person lying next to me and reached for the lamp. It wouldn't give any light. I squinted through the darkness, trying to discern the black shape in the bed. It felt familiar, its warmth, its texture. I was fairly certain that this was Faye, but I still couldn't remember if she was really with me up here. I couldn't even remember the last time I talked to her. Then she spoke. "What's wrong, Pop-Tart?" A cold hand stroked my cheek. It was not so much fear but confusion that overwhelmed me in that moment. Faye's voice and touch were familiar, but something about them didn't fit together with the bed I sat in, or the layout of the room. "Where are we?" I asked. "Why's the light off?" Faye cleared her throat. "Power's out," she said. "It's done this before." I got up out of bed. As soon as the sheets came off my body, I felt blistering cold, colder than it's ever been in our bedroom. The heat must have been off for hours. A feeling of dread came over me, growing heavier and heavier the more awake I became. "Jesus," I said. "Did you screw with the heat? It's fucking freezing in here." Faye tried to get me to come back to bed. Her voice was clear and lively, as it had been when we first arrived at Paled Peak. "Are we still here?" I wondered. A gust of frigid air nipped at me from behind. Perplexed, I left the bedroom and felt my way down the hall. A strong draft pushed against me as I did, and Faye's voice called out from behind me. "Felix, where are you going?" The kitchen window sat wide open. Snow blew in from outside. My jaw dropped. More of my senses returned. I spun around saying, "Faye? Why the hell did you—" But the words tangled in my mouth. Faye stepped out of the bedroom and stood there in the hall. I recognized the outline of her figure, but her posture was different. "You all right?" she asked. "Did you have a bad dream?" The feeling of this was not Faye crept over me. I instantly regretted leaving the Magnum somewhere in the bedroom. "Who are you?" I whispered, taking a step back. The kitchen knives were a few yards behind me to the left. The front door was the same distance to the right. I couldn't remember where my shoes were. Faye didn't move a muscle. Her hair glowed faintly in the starlight that came from the bathroom window behind her, but her face was entirely black. Even though I couldn't see them, I could feel her eyes burning into me just as Taway's had done when I'd found the ring. It felt like we stood in the eye of a hurricane. A calmness fell over the cabin, but it portended certain doom. Not a single noise came from the outside. No branches snapped, no snow crunched, no voices moaned. It was as if time had stopped. Faye stood with an inhuman stillness. Even when she spoke, she held herself perfectly still with the rigidity of death. She hissed my name. Felix. It wasn't to get my attention. It wasn't to convince me that she was the woman I loved. It was a threat. She was reminding me that she knew my name. In the moment, I still didn't fully understand the power in names that Taway and Nathan had discussed, but when Faye said my name, I felt smaller than her, even though I stood almost a foot over her head. "What makes 5? She whispered, cocking her head sideways. Her neck crackled as she did. "Huh?" "I can't remember," she said. "Not in this place." She took a menacing step toward me. She cleared her throat again, and the voice dropped lower than Faye's ever could. "What makes 5? Tell me." And that's when I knew. I remembered where I was, what day it was, and exactly what had happened up until this moment. My dark visitor had finally come to call, and he no longer needed to be invited in. I deeply regretted breaking the dream catcher. Perhaps it was protecting me after all, and perhaps my destroying it had unleashed him. My hand instinctively slid over my pocket, and to my relief, the little shape of Faye's engagement ring pushed back my fingers. A strange feeling came over me then. It was the knowledge that I was about to die. It felt different from all the times I feared I might die. In prior instances of mortal danger, terror completely overwhelmed my senses and compelled me to flee, to fight, to save myself, but now I had passed the point where death becomes a certainty. I was convinced that my life was about to end, and so fear became useless. There was nothing left to do now. My time had come. I decided to throw down the gauntlet. "You're not Faye," I said. The creature twitched, tilting its head. Further, a slew of crackles issued from it. He took another step. "5," he gurgled. What makes? I have no idea what it means," I continued. "No matter what you do to me, it won't change that." The creature shook with rage. He reached a clawed finger to the wall beside him and dragged a talon across it. His breathing grew raspy and shallow. A peculiar revelation struck me in that moment. This being, whatever he was, had been invading Faye's sleeping mind for God knows how long, perhaps many years. Maybe even since she first visited the cabin as a child. He had asked her hundreds of questions, watched her all night, listened to her dreams, and in all that time he still hadn't discovered what he sought from her. Faye kept some things buried so deep within herself that not even he could find them. Whatever the number 5 means to Faye, that deep place is where she hid the secret, and the creature seemed to have no power to access it. "You're the one who followed us home," I said. He nodded. "You've asked her many times," I said. "Each time she tells you nothing. I'm her future husband and she never told me. You'll never get your answer, not in 100 years. And if you ever talk to her again, I'll beat your ugly ass to death with my bare hands." I squared off with the creature, ready to get mauled. I was satisfied with the knowledge I had not given him what he wanted, and had thereby blocked him from using that information as a weapon against Faye. Whatever the number 5 meant, this thing seemed to need it to take full possession of her. And that wasn't going to happen, not even over my dead body. The creature let out a growl so deep, I felt it more than heard it. There in the dark hallway, he twitched violently, then began to change. The likeness of Faye stretched wider and higher. Limbs popped and bent into new positions. The neck rose, the head tilted upward toward the ceiling, revealing a different face beneath the chin. The shoulders rolled backward and folded like butterfly wings and returned broader than before. The fingers uncurled into longer clawed digits. And now my visitor towered over me by several inches. He sucked in a huge, rasping breath and mumbled through clenched teeth. The words all came from different voices. He didn't even try to mimic Faye this time. "Then we don't need you anymore." My courage dissolved. The imposter was on me like lightning. In a single lunge, he covered 15 feet and knocked the wind right out of me with a brutal headbutt. I toppled backward and crash-landed on the floor near the doorway, my neck and shoulders bearing most of the impact. He was on me in an instant, unleashing a barrage of blows to my head. He raked my chest with razor-like claws. I tried my best to defend myself, but it was so dark in the house that I couldn't see where the strikes came from. As the shadowy figure beat down on me, I freed a hand and clawed at its face, searching for eyes to gouge out. A row of teeth caught my fingers and bit down hard on them. And then I felt a mixture of blood and saliva drip down my forearm. I screamed and threw a wild elbow, rallying wider and higher. Rallying my strength as it collided with a wet smack against the creature's jaw. He howled in pain and relented just long enough for me to get to my feet. I hoisted myself by grabbing the counter that separated the kitchen from the living room. As my hands moved over it, they brushed against a familiar object, Taway's neck pouch. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I snatched up the pouch and ripped it open, palming a handful of the chunky substance inside. The creature yanked me back by the neck with the strength of a linebacker. I whirled around and jammed my palm into his face, twisting the heel of my hand against his eyes and shouting, "Leave my family alone, you son of a bitch." I wrapped my other arm around his head for leverage. Faye's curly locks tangled between my fingers. Hours before, I had seen the gruesome remnants of my friend stretched over the creature like an ill-fitted Halloween mask. Now he donned human features I had known far longer. I prayed that Faye was still alive and that the imposter had not taken this hair from her head. He shrieked and growled in some inhuman language, trying to push me away. But I held on as hard as I could and kept driving the sage into his eyes. As my hand slid over the misshapen lumps of his face, I felt his bones shift and slide. I felt a mouth too wide to be human and wet, sticky lips that draped across 100 jagged fangs. And then it was over. The bastard had had enough. He took off on all fours, shrieking like a banshee in 5 different voices. He barreled up the kitchen wall and out the window, disappearing into the night. I'm going to answer a text while I'm doing this. I'm going to explain to you what has happened, because the first time I read this, I was a little bit confused. I want you to know that Tuwei is dead. The imposter killed him and used his face as a mask to hide his own real face. That's why Felix said the face that I saw was Tuwei's. It wasn't Tuwei. Tuwei is not the imposter. Tuwei hasn't been the imposter the whole time or anything like that. The imposter killed Tuwei. And now it's using some red hair that looks like Faye's to present itself as Faye. However, it's not using Faye's face, and that's why Felix is like, oh, hopefully she's not dead, type of situation. So I just wanted to explain that, because the first time I read it, I was a little confused, so I'm just explaining that for anyone watching. We have time for maybe one more chapter, I think. But it's also the idea of he was in bed with that thing, like it was touching him. And that's so freaky to me. I cried long and hard in the empty living room. Never had I felt so utterly, miserably alone. I only managed to stop when the power came back on about 20 minutes later, and the sound of the heater kicking on felt like the greeting of an old friend. The entryway was decorated with my own blood. The satellite phone was gone, the gun was gone, my shoes were gone. Everything was probably outside in the snow or up in a tree, or down in the hole. But at least I still had the ring. The imposter could have taken it while I slept, but for some reason he did not. I vowed to myself that at daybreak, no matter the conditions, I would take Greg's truck and get down the mountain, or die trying. I didn't care if I slid off the cliff face. I'd never watch the sun go down in Colorado ever again. It took about an hour for the adrenaline to wear off, at which point the beating I had taken began to register across my body. My bruised side now quivered with fresh agony, and my face sported 2 big welts. Ragged lacerations crisscrossed my torso, burning like fire with each movement. As I patched myself up with trembling hands in the bathroom, the voices returned. They arose from far off in the woods, several of them at once, groaning and screaming their dark elegies to the night. It was all the same evil gibberish I'd heard 1,000 times before, but now they made their way into the open field and eventually to just outside the cabin. Soon a dozen voices, maybe more, babbled and shouted and cackled all around me. It was still too dark outside to see anything, but tiny pink and purple bands streaked the rim of the sky. It would be morning soon. Fearing another confrontation, I limped around the house, ensuring that every window and door was locked. Not knowing what else I could do, I picked up the remainder of Tuwei's sage and set fire to it, wafting the smoke around the room until my fingers burned. I imagined the shattered dream catcher and my crumpled corpse behind it. It may as well have been warding off the imposter all this time, and now there was nothing left of it to protect me. The voices moved in circles around the cabin, whispering and wailing and weeping as they did. I imagined the Seussian production of Seussian, like Dr. Seuss, procession of corpses marching around the perimeter, ritually celebrating the demise of another fool who had come across Pale Peak. Grim shadows moved across the curtains all around me. The pitter-patter of little feet echoed across the roof, layered with the sounds of children giggling. Outside the front door, my own voice called out, "Faye, it's me. Let me in." Seconds later, it called from near the bedroom door. "I'm so cold, Monkey Toes. Please let me in. Please help me." The imposter was making his victory lap through my mind, allowing me a preview of what was to be Faye's ultimate fate shortly after he killed me. He wanted to terrorize me before the end to make certain that he had plans for her. Windows shattered across the cabin, first in the bedroom, then the bathroom. The kitchen window burst behind me, showering me with flakes of glass and snow. The howling winds blew in, deafening me to all other sounds and granting cover to anything that crawled inside. And then, as if heaven sent, a blinding white light illuminated the entire building. All the window curtains of the front of the house lit up, and the sound of motors roared over the screaming wind. A hellish cry rang out in defiance somewhere down the hall. Someone had driven up to the cabin. The wind ceased altogether, as if banished by my fearful prayers, and I heard car doors opening and men calling out to each other. The footsteps on the roof thundered overhead to the back of the cabin, and the screams of children drifted off into the woods out back, reverberating across the mountain as they withdrew. The ranger bashed down the front door. "Felix! Felix, are you there? Open up. It's William." I ripped a curtain open and saw 5 men. 4 of them were rangers, and Nathan was the other. Behind them sat a humongous off-road snowplow, 2 snowmobiles, and a pickup truck. The men gathered on the porch and shined their flashlights all over the cabin. They had come to save my life. I rushed outside and threw my arms around William. Snot and tears caked my face, and I did nothing to hide my childish comportment. I didn't even grab my winter jacket. He informed me loudly that they were getting everyone off the mountain because of a problem with the power grid, but when I looked up at him, he gave me a subtle wink. William glanced over to Nathan, who nodded back. The compassion of my friends overwhelmed me, not just the ones here, but also the ones looking after Faye back at home. As we loaded into the plow, I took one last look at the shredded tires of Greg's truck. Without my saviors, there wasn't even a dream of escape. The drive down the mountain would have been the happiest ride of my life if not for the view. We snaked across the slippery white roads, and even the truck's high beams on, I could still see the fading stars in the dawn sky. But beneath them, dangling in the trees, were scores of human bodies. They swung from their necks or wrists or feet, fastened with dark red rope that looked much like the Dreamcatcher sinew. As they passed overhead on our downward crawl, I could barely make out their frozen faces, lifeless for years, maybe decades. Some of them were flayed or in missing body parts, and their black blood stained the trunks of the trees. The ranger did not appear to notice, so I kept my mouth shut. I'm not sure if these were the spirits Tway had spoken about, or if temporary insanity had poisoned my mind. Perhaps I'll never know for sure, but as I watched them drift past, I imagined what might have happened if the ranger had showed up an hour later than he did. I imagined my own corpse swinging there, and my bones strung up in a fresh dream-catcher nearby. The faces of those mangled corpses will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. The ranger took me to an emergency room where he vouched to the hospital staff that I had a brush with a wolf. They gave me injections and stitches and antibiotics and eyed me suspiciously as we left. 24 hours later, I found myself at the airport. I had no luggage, only the promise that William would ship my possessions to me. Right before I got out of his truck, he muttered, "Tway's dead." Although I already knew it, the words eviscerated my heart. That pain was reflected in William's face. He and Tway were dear friends and had known each other for decades. He got turned around in the blizzard, William said, barely able to force the truth out of his mouth. They think a bear might have got him. None of the typical anxiety troubled me on the flight home. No nausea, no claustrophobia. Only the memory of Tway's warmth and his unspeakable demise. The thoughts rotted me from within. As I sat there with my head against the window, a constellation of possibilities presented itself in my mind. The imposter gave Faye's ring back to me. He wanted me to destroy the Dreamcatcher. The totem, whatever it was. The ring was an object of great sentimental value, both to Faye and to my family. The creature used it to invade her mind and control her thoughts, to weaken our relationship, to make us suffer. But for some reason, the imposter hadn't learned everything he needed to fully conquer Faye. He gave up on that project and instead came after me. I believed that when the creature returned the ring to me, he gave up on some of the influence over Faye, but he gained something else in exchange. By destroying the Dreamcatcher, I gave him the keys to the cabin. I let him in. And when he came, his goal was to extract the meaning of the number 5 from me. I'm not sure I'll ever unravel the truth behind that number, but I believe that my ignorance might have saved Faye's life. My ignorance truly is her bliss. Walking into my home and seeing Faye light up nearly stopped my heart. An ineffable mixture of joy and sorrow overwhelmed me, and we wrapped each other in a long hug, after which I endured a volley of angry slaps and kisses. I understood. She was furious I'd spent so much time trying to take control of the situation, that I treated her like a child and disregarded her feelings in my crusade to rescue her. Tyler and Colin were delighted to leave our house and never look Faye in the eye again, although they did have some good news for me. She had not walked or talked in her sleep or done anything out of the ordinary in a little under 2 days. This corresponded almost exactly with the moment when I recovered the engagement ring. After an hour or so of reprimanding me for being an idiot, Faye forgave me, and we lay in bed together holding each other in the silence of deep relief. At the end of the night, I took the ring out of my pocket and slid it onto her finger. The smile on her face soothed every bruise of my body and soul. The 2 little emeralds looking up at me sparkled, then disappeared behind tired eyelids. For the first time in what felt like forever, we slept without worry. In the dead of night, Faye leaned over and kissed me in the dark, saying, "Thank you for trying so hard for me." Then she licked my face. We're gonna stop now. We are 70% the way through. We are now in part 4 of the book, which is the final part, I believe. So, it seems like a happy ending so far, but there's actually a little bit more to it. I'm gonna go back to just chatting and change over my music because we are gonna stop here. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Sorry you're hearing so many sirens. It's the firefighters. I guess I think across the street there was a fire alarm, which happens a lot on campus because people smoke inside buildings or set fires in microwaves. So it's very common, especially at the building across the street for some reason. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's reading of Stolen Tongues. I believe that this was the climax of the book, or at least part of it. It gave me chills. I mean, I've read this book before, it scared me, but it gave me chills. Yeah. So, I'm gonna do my outro, see if there's anyone we can raid. But while I'm doing that, those of you watching on YouTube, if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it's completely free, so you can always unsubscribe later. I'd love it if my Twitch would work right now. That would be so great. Sorry, my Twitch is being a little silly. A little silly goose. There we go. I wanted to do my commands. Alrighty, let's see. Anybody streaming tonight? Nobody's streaming right now, so we're just gonna wrap it up. Reminder that I'm not streaming Friday or Saturday, but I am streaming tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, with some more Counterside. So I will see you guys then. I hope you have a great night, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.